Okay, so you know how you've been sending over all those like really interesting things about how books kind of, impact us?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it got us like really thinking,
Yeah.
are books just like stories we just take in, or do they like actively kind of help shape us into who we become?
Well, it's that like active part that's so interesting to me. Like
Oh,
it
right.
really makes you think.
Yeah.
And the main thing, you sent that video from Lady of the Library on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
She really like dives into this whole idea, but from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
Like looking back at all the stuff she's read and how it all kind of affected her.
Yeah, and that just like instantly reminded me of something I read by Marcel Proust.
Oh, yeah.
And he had this idea that reading like isn't just about, understanding what the author is saying, but like what it sparks in us. You know, he called it like the reader's provocations or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the book starts this whole conversation in your head.
Absolutely. And he basically said that the books that have the most power aren't the ones that wrap everything up perfectly.
Right.
They're the ones that kind of leave you hanging a bit, like with some unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And then that makes us want to use our own, wisdom and desires.
Exactly.
So like the author might have reached a conclusion,
Uh-huh.
but that's just the beginning of like a much deeper journey for the reader.
Right, like internally.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not as much deeper journey.
And what's really interesting here is that it's like the complete opposite of how we usually think about authors.
Right. Yeah.
Like usually we think they're the only ones who know stuff.
Yeah, like the source of all knowledge.
Exactly. But Proust is saying it's like the reader who's really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they're the ones who make meaning.
It's like the author throws a rock into a pond and then our thoughts and reactions are the ripples.
That's a great analogy.
And the YouTuber's own experience is like a perfect example of this.
Oh.
Well, she talked about her old series, Books That Made Me, and why she stopped doing it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And she said it was because she was going through depression.
Yeah.
And that like totally changed how she felt about reading in general.
Wow. So it's like a really strong reminder that what's going on inside us really affects how we experience books.
Yeah.
And how they change us.
It makes you wonder about those books you really loved.
Yeah.
Like, what if you read them now? And because you're different, you don't feel the same way about them.
Yeah. Like, you've changed so much.
Yeah. And she even mentioned being scared to read some of her favorites.
Really?
Because she thought it might ruin them.
Oh, wow.
Like, if she wasn't in the right headspace.
Yeah, that's like a really powerful idea.
It is.
Like, you're so afraid of what the book could do to you now.
Right.
That you don't even want to read it.
And it shows how much respect she has for the power of books.
Exactly.
Like, she knows that our mindset can totally change how we see them.
Yeah, it's like acknowledging that the book is still the same, but we've changed.
Right.
So our experience will be different.
And she even said that she didn't used to get why someone would stop reading fiction after they turned 30. But then she ended up doing the same thing.
Wow. So it's like our reading lives are always changing.
They really are.
Like what we like and don't like can change so much.
And it makes you think about all those books we read when we were kids.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like she was saying how those books have a huge influence on us.
Yeah, totally.
Especially when we're young.
Especially then.
And they really help shape who we are.
I think she's right.
Yeah.
Like, think about how many people identify with the books they loved as kids.
Yeah.
Like the Harry Potter generation.
Yeah.
It's like those books become part of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she also talked about how a bad experience with a book can make you hate it forever.
Like being forced to read Shakespeare in school.
Exactly.
And how those early experiences, whether they're good or bad, really affect what we choose to read later on.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like it shapes our reading habits and what we like.
Her whole deep dive into her experience with Harry Potter was really interesting.
Oh, yeah. What did she say?
It wasn't just about the books themselves, but like the whole cultural phenomenon, like all the excitement around the new releases.
Yeah.
And, even feeling like you had to act a certain way.
Oh, yeah. Like you had to prove you were a fan.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And the really fascinating part is that she realized that her experience of reading the books, like the whole social context and everything, actually played a bigger role in how she felt about the series than the story itself.
That's wild.
Like, she even remembers hiding in her closet to read the last book.
Really? Why?
Because she didn't want anyone to spoil the ending.
Oh, wow.
And even though she wasn't super happy with the ending, that whole experience in the closet became a really important part of her Harry Potter story.
Wow. So it's like the experience of reading can be just as important as what you actually read.
Yeah. And then there are those times when you just stumble upon a book. Like, she said she only picked up Moby Dick because she saw it in the movie Matilda.
Oh, yeah.
And that book ended up having a huge impact on her.
Wow.
It's like sometimes the best books find us in the most unexpected ways.
I love that.
But then she also talked about rereading To Kill a Mockingbird, which she used to love.
Right.
But when she read it again as an adult, it just wasn't the same.
So it's like our tastes change as we get older.
Exactly.
And the meaning we get from books can change too.
It really is a dynamic process.
Absolutely.
Like both the reader and the book are always changing.
It's like a conversation.
Yeah, and that brings us to this idea of reading as a way of expanding ourselves.
Right.
Like it's not just passively absorbing information, it's about actively engaging with the text and letting it challenge our perspectives.
Exactly. And being open to that influence.
Right.
To having our assumptions questioned and our horizons broadened.
And she made a really good point about how revisiting books we didn't like before can sometimes give us new insights.
Yeah, like we see them in a whole new light.
And on the flip side, books we love might not resonate with us anymore.
It's true.
It's a two-way street.
Definitely.
And, Toni Morrison's work is really helpful for understanding this.
Oh, yeah. I love her writing.
Especially her book, Playing in the Dark, Whiteness and the Literary Imagination.
Yeah. What does she say about it?
Well, she looks at how American fiction has historically been written with a white audience in mind.
Right. Like as the default.
Yeah. And what's really important about her perspective is that she argues that this focus on white readers has led to certain literary conventions and assumptions, like what she calls literary whiteness and literary blackness. And these don't always represent the experiences of Black writers and readers.
Right.
She points out the limitations and challenges that Black writers face because they're working within a literary system where even the language itself can carry racial hierarchy.
Wow, that's deep.
And perpetuate what she calls dismissive othering.
It's like the language itself is biased.
And the YouTuber shared this really powerful quote from Morrison.
Oh, what was it?
About how Black writers have to free up the language from these deeply ingrained, racially informed constraints.
It's like they have to fight against the language itself.
It shows how these biases can be woven into our literary tradition, sometimes without us even realizing it.
It's like they're invisible, but they're still there.
And, that brings us to this bigger issue of exclusion in literature.
Right.
When certain voices and experiences are constantly pushed to the margins or misrepresented.
That's unfair.
It limits the perspectives that are available to everyone. And it can make readers who don't see themselves reflected in those stories feel invisible and invalidated.
Like their experiences don't matter.
And that's why this push for more diversity in reading and publishing and in who gets to tell their stories is so important.
It's not just about being fair.
Exactly.
It's about giving everyone a chance to be heard.
It's about making sure that everyone feels seen and understood.
And it's about expanding our own understanding of the world.
Precisely by actively seeking out and engaging with a wider range of voices and perspectives, we can start to dismantle those unconscious biases and develop a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Like being open to different ways of seeing things.
And questioning what stories are told and whose stories are amplified becomes a really important part of how we allow books to shape us.
That's so true.
But on a more personal level, the YouTuber also talked about how the kind of reading we do can actually affect our mental health.
Oh, wow. In what way?
Well, she said that she started feeling more stressed and anxious when she was reading a lot of stuff online and keeping up with all the negative.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with information days.
Right.
And a lot of it is negative.
Yeah, and it's often presented in a way that's really fragmented and emotionally charged.
That's so true.
And that can actually affect our brain chemistry.
Wow.
So she's saying it's important to be mindful about what we read.
Yeah.
And to make time for more sustained and immersive reading experience
Even to reading books.
Exactly.
That's so
because she had some really practical advice.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
For being more intentional about how we let books shape us.
Yeah, okay.
Her first suggestion was to choose books that challenge us.
Oh, interesting.
Like to step outside our comfort zones and even our own beliefs.
Like reading things that make us uncomfortable?
Yeah. But she was clear that this isn't about engaging with hateful ideologies.
It's about actively seeking out perspectives that are different from our own.
Okay.
Like maybe exploring authors from different cultures or religions or political viewpoints.
That's a good idea.
Within ethical boundaries, of course.
Of course.
But this kind of intellectual stretching can be really valuable
Yeah, totally.
For developing empathy and critical thinking and just understanding complex issues better.
It makes you think about things in a different way.
Yeah.
Like from someone else's perspective.
And her second tip was to keep a reading diary.
Oh, that's a good.
Or a commonplace book, as they're traditionally called.
I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, she actually shared a funny story about how she tried to do this when she was younger.
Oh, really?
And it was a total mess.
So it's not as easy as it sounds.
Well, it can be if you're organized.
Right.
But the basic idea of a commonplace book is to have a place where you can actively engage with what you're reading.
Okay.
Like write down interesting quotes or your own thoughts and reflections. You can even draw in it if you want.
I like that.
It's a way to really make the text your own.
Yeah.
And to create a record of your journey as a reader.
I might have to try that.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, so to sum up, we've talked about how books can help us discover ourselves by sparking our own thoughts and desires.
Right.
And how our own experiences and emotions really affect how we connect with books.
And the lasting impact of those early books we read.
Exactly.
And we've looked at how our own identities and perspectives shape how we interpret what we read and how important it is to include diverse voices in literature.
Right. And finally, we talked about how what we choose to read can actually affect our mental health.
Yeah.
And how to be more intentional about our reading.
So we want to ask you some questions.
Oh, okay.
What was the last book that really changed you as an adult?
That's a good question.
And what about it made such a big impact on you?
Yeah, what really stuck with you?
Or thinking back to your childhood, what book do you think really shaped who you are today?
It's amazing how much those early books can affect us.
And looking ahead, what are you looking for in your future reading experiences?
Like what kind of books do you want to read?
We'd love to hear how books have changed your reading habits or what genres you like, or even your whole perspective on the world.
Like, how have books made you who you are?
And one last thing to think about.
Okay.
How might the books you haven't read be shaping your understanding of the world?
That's interesting.
Like, what perspectives are you missing out on?
It's like there's a whole world of books out there.
And you never know what you might discover
until
you start reading.
I'm definitely going to think about that.
Me too.